Welcome. On behalf of Cleveland Peace Action, I would like to welcome you to our program this evening. My name is Mark Weber, president of Cleveland Peace Action. With tonight's program, we begin a two-part examination of the phenomena of settler colonialism. This evening, January 18th, we will examine settler colonialism within the context of Palestine. Our speaker is Mazin Qumsiyeh. In 3 weeks, on February 11th, we will discuss settler colonialism in a more or less North American context. And for this event, our speaker will be Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. We would like to thank all of you for registering to attend tonight's program. And we hope that all of you and a few more will return in 3 weeks. Cleveland Peace Action is an affiliate of Peace Action, the largest and oldest peace organization in the United States. Our commitment is not merely to a peaceful world, but rather to a peaceful world founded on the principles of equality, nonviolence, and justice. You can help us realize this goal. Please go to peaceaction.org and make a contribution. This will enable us to continue to provide thought-provoking programs like the one that we are about to hear. Please help us with a contribution that is within your means. Again, thank you for attending tonight's program. And now I would like to introduce our next two preliminary speakers in order of their appearance. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Philip Yenyo, the leader of the American Indian Movement of Ohio. And Philip will read the land recognition statement. Philip will be followed by Faten Odeh, co-chair of the Middle East Peace Committee of Cleveland Peace Action. And Faten will introduce our featured speaker for this evening. So Philip, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the great spirit that brought us all here together tonight for this presentation. And now I would like to acknowledge our ancestors and spirits that are going to be with us here tonight, because our ancestors are always with us. It doesn't matter what nationality you are. Our ancestors watch over us, guide us, and that's what I think is happening tonight. Next, I'd like to acknowledge that we gathered here tonight on land that was originally stewarded by the Wyandotte, Delaware, Shawnee, Ottawa, the Miami, the Erie, the Eel River, the Way, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Piankashaw, Kaskia, Mingo, and Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe were also known as by two other names. The French called them the Ojibwe, and the British called them the Chippewa. We honor with gratitude the land itself, because it provides for us, and the people who lived here and cared for it. I would also like to acknowledge the Adena mound builders who came before them, ancient ancestors. And with that, I will turn the floor over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Philip. My name is Faten Odeh, and I will be introducing Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh. Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh teaches and does research at Bethlehem and Birzeit universities. He previously served on the faculties of the University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale universities. He and his wife returned to Palestine in 2008, starting a number of institutions and projects such as a clinical genetics laboratory that serves cancer in other patients. They founded and run the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity, sorry, one moment, for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Dr. Qumsiyeh has published over 140 scientific papers on topics ranging from cultural heritage to biodiversity to cancer. His many published books include Bats of Egypt, Mammals of the Holy Land, Sharing the Land of Canaan, Human Rights and the Israeli-Palestinian Struggle, and Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment. He also published hundreds of articles and letters to the editor and has an activism book published electronically, which you can find on his website, qumsiyeh.org. He gave hundreds of talks in 45 countries around the world. He's especially passionate about youth empowerment towards social and environmental causes. The programs he and his wife created have impacted thousands. In addition to all of these amazing works, in his spare time, whenever he finds some, I'm very surprised that he has spare time, he serves on the board of a number of Palestinian youth and service organizations. All of his work in environment and social justice has not gone unnoticed. Dr. Qumsiyeh was harassed and arrested for nonviolent actions, but also received a number of prestigious awards for these same actions. I wanted to keep it brief per Dr. Qumsiyeh's humble request, but all of that I've just listed is not enough to do him justice. It brings me great honor to welcome the wonderful Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh. Welcome, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this and for organizing this. Yeah, I told Fatin, make it brief. I told you, Fatin, just say I'm a troublemaker. That should suffice. Maybe I don't need. But anyways, I have a presentation which I'll go through, but I'll skip a lot of slides because I want to focus on certain issues that I was asked to focus on. And also some of you may have attended some of the other talks that I give sometimes, like I gave one at the Community Church of Boston last week, and I presented some of these slides. So I'll skip some of them that I talked about last week. But anyways, I want to focus on a couple of important issues here, especially in relation to settler colonialism. I also, just for a disclaimer, won't spend too much time talking about the symptoms of settler colonialism. There are many. Perhaps the only symptom I want to focus on a little bit is environmental issues related to settler colonialism. But when I look at, we're in the beginning of 2022. When I look at what happened in 2021, you see basically 86 Palestinian children were killed. There was normalization with the Arab world between Israel and some countries in the Arab world. There was banning of human rights groups. There was the COP26, the climate change conference in Glasgow. There were a lot of things happening, and these are things that ail our planet, if you want, that we try to deal with. Well, what is it that we as human beings try to do is to deal with this. I mean, in the US, for example, sometimes there is also people don't understand connectivity of things. Why were there Israeli flags in the demonstrations in Washington, January 6? At the same time, there were Israeli flags. There were also anti-Semitic T-shirts and banners and things like that. What's that about? There's a lot of things in our world that sometimes don't immediately connect to us. And they will if you really dig a little deeper into issues like settler colonialism and the fact that Israel as a settler colonial racist state is allied with other settler colonial mentalities around the world. Now, I am speaking to you from Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus, and Bethlehem is a very special place, and I'm very privileged to be in Bethlehem speaking to you, even at 2 in the morning here, but it's still very nice to be in this location. It's a bit cold, and there is some rain, which is, we are blessed with it because we have, with climate change, reduced rain and so forth. Bethlehem and Palestine in general are at the crossroad of history and civilization. Even migrations of humans out of Africa happened through Palestine. So I would dare to say that you guys are all Palestinian by migration out of Africa through Palestine, or we can say we are Africans. But also birds migrate out of, back and forth, Palestine to Europe and Eurasia in general to this day, because it's like a bottleneck that Palestine is. This bottleneck is also important as a fertile crescent where humans first developed agriculture about 12,000 years ago. And these people here, native people, indigenous people of Palestine, the Canaanitic people, who are my ancestors, basically also invented the alphabet and did some other contributions to society, including, evolution of religions here, etc. These are just some images from here. Now, my main topic really is to talk about settler colonialism, and I don't want to make this a history lesson, so I don't want to delve too deep into it. All I can say is that there was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society, a country called Palestine, known as Palestine for 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. And this country called Palestine was to be transformed to a monolithic society. It was to become the Jewish state of Israel. So from multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, even multilingual, the idea is to make it the Jewish state. Of course, to do that, you have to remove the native people. It's similar in that sense to every other colonial system that tried to transform a country to something that it was not before, like North America or Africa or Latin America or all of these things. In the case of Palestine, 530 Palestinian villages and towns were depopulated, shown in the red spots on this map. And this is how the state of Israel was created, by creating refugees. And there were, today, if we look at the populations, there are 14 million Palestinians. There are 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people. And the rest live in Bantustans, ghettos in what's called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which, this shrinking of the land that was allocated to us didn't happen suddenly. It happened over a period of 100 years, basically, with the growth of the Zionist colonization of Palestine. Similar to what happened in North America, if you want. The United States, for example, that started in 1492 as a land of native people. And as the European colonizers settled first on the East Coast and then going west, young man, spread to the rest of the country and squeezed the Palestinians at it's a Freudian slip, squeezed the Native Americans into smaller and smaller reservations, basically. This is what we call settler colonialism. It is not uncommon in the world. Just about every country had experience with settler colonialism. The country that most recently is trying to break out of settler colonialism history is South Africa, for example, where the native people, indigenous people, were relegated to Bantustans, and these Bantustans, they're called Bantustans because their stan is a country and Bantu is the Bantu people. There are countries for the Bantu people that remained or are squeezed into those black areas in South Africa. South Africa moved post-apartheid, although there is still economic apartheid. Palestine is still in the midst of apartheid, where we have access to only, as the native people, we have access to only 8.3% of the land of Palestine. It is important for us to make this correct diagnosis. As I said, I don't want to talk too much about symptoms, but it is fairly important to look at settler colonialism as a diagnosis. And you are very familiar with settler colonialism. We as Americans are familiar with it, if you want. Our history, the US history is replete with the details of it, and I don't want to again delve into it in the next session. I think you will talk more about it in North America. But you know the imagery, for example, like this painting, which shows this white settlers coming, bringing industrialization, bringing knowledge, bringing even light. And the natives and the wild animals basically running away. And occasionally, of course, they attack these beautiful white settlers who have to circle the wagons to protect themselves. This is the imagery that all colonialists have of themselves and that they want to project to their own people, that the natives are basically savages attacking us for no obvious reason. We're just bringing this development and technology and civilization, so to speak, to this backward society. This is precisely the kind of language that's also used here. And it's a language that is very well understood in the context of settler colonialism. Now, in the case of Palestine, the native people, as I showed you, were subjected to these projections for many, many decades. And in the case of the West encounter with the Arab world, if you want, you can read Edward Said's book, Orientalism, which explains these phenomena of projecting to the native certain things. I mean, the picture on the left, by the way, is a picture from a 200-year-old book by Europeans that supposedly shows European being attacked in the Jordan River by the natives, by those savage natives. Of course, this whole is imaginary, delusional colonial mentality. The Palestinians didn't look anything like this imagery that they showed, which is mostly basically showing like from Indonesia or something. Kayaks, certainly there's no kayaks in the Jordan River, but nevertheless, the point is well taken that basically, again, the natives attack these beautiful people who are just minding their own business, having an exercise down the Jordan River. This Orientalism ideas, are projected in art and music and in literature in many, many ways. There is, of course, a general a group of post-colonial studies that try to investigate this, that explains this, and I don't want to get into it too much. The Mother Europe here is feeding the children of the world. Within the context of what we have here, the European colonizers like, Moshe Dayan or others, who even delved into archaeology and invented archaeology, basically fabricated history even. Dayan was not an archaeologist, he was a politician, but he was a quote unquote amateur archaeologist trying to find connectivity between European Jews and Palestine, so to speak. Colonialism also impacts the environment, which is the main thing I want to talk about a little bit. There's something that we call greenwashing. And when Israel destroyed these Palestinian villages and towns, this is an image from Visualizing Palestine, which shows that many of the Palestinian villages and towns were replaced with national parks. Some of them were redeveloped into industrial or other facilities. But nevertheless, there was this propaganda that Israel planted trees in Palestine. And they did plant trees, what they created as national parks. But they were trees to replace the Palestinian trees. They bulldozed the Palestinian trees, which were diverse, agro-biodiversity. They include things like oak and carobs and figs and almonds and olives and all these different kinds of trees. And they planted in place of them European pine trees, which are more monolithic, if you want, which are not helpful to the environment. They're harmful to the environment. So there was a lot of activities that are related to this, what I call environmental colonialism. This includes, of course, pillaging natural resources like water, for example. Water was taken for the use of settlers, transported, for example, from many places like Lake Tiberias to the west, drying up the Jordan Valley, including drying up the Dead Sea, etc. I'll show you a few more examples later of this environmental pillage and destruction. But we have to remember this all compounded an existing already situation of environmental catastrophe that we humans face. And that's climate change and human impact on the environment. There are actually 5 main threats that impact the environment in the world. And we can add settler colonialism as a 6th one. I don't know why the United Nations doesn't recognize it. But the 5 major threats are climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, invasive species, and what was the 5th one? Now it's kind of late, I'll think of it in a minute. But you can add to it settler colonialism. Climate change, of course, is affecting us all, but settler colonialism is affecting places that settler colonialism still persists. This is an area near the West Jerusalem hills, where there were 25 Palestinian villages that were razed, wiped out in 1948, including Deir Yassin and Lifta and many others, people expelled. Israel planted trees, European pine trees, which are more susceptible to fires. And ironically, when the fires happened, as you see in the picture in the upper left-hand corner, the fires exposed the Palestinian terraces, that agricultural terraces in which the original trees were planted, the Palestinian trees were planted. Here's diversion of the waters of the Jordan Valley from Lake Tiberias, which dried up the Jordan Valley and caused desertification to spread, as shown in the satellite image. Here's drying up of the wetlands of the Hula area that the colonial settlers did. There's the pillaging of resources like natural gas off of the coasts of Gaza and other coasts, of course, of Palestine were all taken. This is the water issues, and you can see again from visualizing Palestine, they have very nice visuals showing, for example, how Israeli settlers take most of the Palestinian water and leaving Palestinians even below the World Health Organization limits for healthy living. There's the more localized effects, like here, for example, just next to me in Bethlehem, this hill, Jabal Abu Naim, used to look like what you see on the top in 1997. And at the bottom, you see what it looks like as a Jewish-only settlement, Jewish-only colony called Har Homa. Some of the land there is actually taken from my own relatives. So there was decline in vertebrate biodiversity in Bethlehem as a result of colonial settlement activities. Also, the colonial settlers, they put things like toxic industries near Palestinian areas. So my students and I did research on the genotoxic effect of Israeli industrial settlements. Destruction, you know, we can again talk about a lot about this. I want to now just for 5 minutes speak about remedies and not, you know, as I said, if we want to talk about the symptoms, we could talk forever. We could talk for hours and hours about symptoms of settler colonialism. My background is medical genetics. I say, okay, it's important to look at symptoms to understand what's going on, but it is important then to make the right diagnosis, in this case, settler colonialism, which is also important, but then it's even more important to offer therapies and prognosis, if you want. And you know, I guess each of you knows we have a problem in this world, which is conformity, which is stupidity that's spreading, lack of critical thinking, lack of revolutionary spirit, universities that graduate zombies, basically, instead of people that question authority, etc. We have to reverse this, and there are few of us relative to the other population. You know, it's always, by the way, there's a few people who profit and greedy people. There are a few people who fight those greedy people, and the vast majority is apathetic. They don't care. Our job is actually to bring some of those apathetic people to start to care and start to do something about situations. Well, so what to do about settler colonialism? I mean, settler colonialism in North America, for example, they killed 2 million buffaloes. Settler colonialism in Palestine made 8 million Palestinian refugees, etc. And settler colonialism, there was a slide here, I skipped over it, just maybe I go back to it. There are 3 scenarios going forward. This is if you want the prognosis. The 3 scenarios are the Algeria model, where 1.5 million local people were killed and 1 million Europeans moved to Europe. I shouldn't say back to Europe. Some of them were 6, 7 generations. There's the genocide model, which happened in the US and Australia, where they left very few native people, manageable, if you want, and reservations, as they call them. And there is a coexistence model, which is found in South America, Central America, Canada, Pacific and Atlantic Islands, Southeast Asia, Northern Ireland, South Africa. There are a lot of places that are now moving away from the 2 first models, which are rare anyway. And most of the world follows that coexistence model. That's if you want the prognosis for this ailment of settler colonialism, is that it's not going back to health, you know. Of course, there's no going back once you get a disease. COVID-19, even people who get it, they are never fully recovered, so to speak, because it leaves remnants. So it is never, you know, a clean break, so to speak. But at least it's the least damaging solution, is that third solution, and the most common solution. And that's what will happen here. That's a prognosis. So what is the therapy? How do we speed it up, if you want? And the way we speed it up is by resisting, by challenging this. And our institute does a little bit along those lines. By working with, you know, having a museum that recognizes cultural diversity, biodiversity. We have Museum of Natural History. We emphasize diversity. Diversity is strength. Colonials don't like diversity, you know. So we work on diversity, basically, human diversity and biodiversity. And we grow our own food. We work with women. We work with children. We try to emphasize the issue of you know, empowerment of people. We say that basically our motto is respect. First, we have to respect ourselves. That's empowerment. Then we respect other people. Then we respect nature. So human diversity and biodiversity, that's what we work on. And, you know, our people are many, and we have many organizations that support us, work with us, including, you know, we got a grant from National Geographic Society. We got grants from the EU, and we have partnerships with Royal Society and with the British Natural History Museum and other institutions. We have a group called Palestine Action for the Planet that does basically a lot of work in terms of climate change and other things. We have a lot of volunteers. Their numbers dwindled to almost nothing because of the pandemic, but now slowly it's coming back. These are just some of the people that are associated with us, that work with us. And of course, we enjoy ourselves also. You know, people come here and spend some good time. Well, you know, Don, when he came here, by the way, he got a tear gas canister in his head. But that's, you know, risks you take if you join or be near demonstrations and things like that. I'll stop here because I really didn't want to go into too many areas. I can, in the question and answer, if you have any subject you are interested in, you're welcome to come and volunteer with us. You're welcome to donate to us books or anything you want to help us. This is our website, palestinenature.org, and you can see there our annual report and videos of our actions. So I'll stop here, and of course we encourage you, if you want to act from where you are, join the BDS movement, join the groups that hosted this meeting, and support you know, human rights wherever you are. You don't have to come here to support human rights. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to hear your questions or comments.
Well, thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh. That was beautiful. I stayed with Mazin and his wife Jessie when I was in Bethlehem, Beit Sahur. So you know, he gave us tours of the area, and that was 10 years ago. So I'd love to go back. It's a beautiful place, beautiful people, always opening doors. When they have nothing, they're making tea for you and bringing some snacks. So thank you for our co-sponsors today. I put you in the chat, their Facebook pages. Also, any questions today for Dr. Qumsiyeh? I had one in the chat earlier, which I could say, unless you wanted to ask it yourself, Catherine. And she was asking about Hisham Abu Hawash, who was on a 141-day hunger strike. If you had, information about his condition. And before you answer, I will also say this is Palestine Prisoner Solidarity Week. So I will put a link in the chat for that purpose.
Yeah, Hisham ended his hunger strike at day 141 after Israel basically succumbed to his demand. He was close to death. He even entered into like coma, in and out of, and he was really, doctors said he will not last a few days. So then Israel decided to make an agreement that he would be released February 26 and be continued treatment in the hospital. So they committed to release him February 26. Unfortunately, we just heard that he was diagnosed with COVID-19, and with his health condition, I worry about his situation. So even though it was a partial victory, there is still a lot of Palestinians on hunger strike, and there are hundreds of Palestinians in so-called administrative detention. These are detentions without even seeing the biased Israeli military courts. We are subject to Israeli military court, not normal situations. So there's one set of laws for Israelis here in the West Bank and one set of laws for Palestinians. Palestinians are subject to Israeli military court system, which is biased. But even though there are 8,000 Palestinians in prison, basically, more than 500 of them have not even seen the Israeli lawyer or Israeli judge or whatever that's supposed to go through some formal process, and they can hold you in administrative detention basically for as long as they want. This is one of the conditions of being under colonial occupation, basically. So Hisham was protesting this administrative detention, that they hold him for months without even telling him if he has a charge or offering him the formality of seeing an Israeli lawyer or seeing a judge or anything.
I did have a comment that, oh boy, where did it go? Someone was saying what a great, fantastic research and presentation. This is from Dan Lieberman. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to Dr. Qumsiyeh, he says, clear and well. And I agree.
I'd just like to say something to Mazin.
Please go ahead, Paul.
Mazin, Lori and I visited, my wife and I visited you in 2019. And I just want to acknowledge that this Natural History Museum that you created there, it's just a beautiful thing. And all the young people involved there, and your acceptance of us Americans who are basically helping destroy your country, and we don't know how to stop it. I got a question. We could keep talking about apartheid, but since the beginning, it's a genocide. It's an erasure of the people. It's an intentional erasure. According to the United Nations, that's called genocide. So why don't we just start calling it that? I mean, that is a powerful distinction.
Yeah, thanks. And I've heard also terms like ecocide and politicide. There's an Israeli author actually wrote a book called Politicide. Genocide, yes, there's an international convention against the crime of genocide. And if you look at the definitions of that and how it fits, you can see that there are many elements in what Israel is doing that is fits under these categories. And genocide is not measured by its success, it's measured by its intention. So there was attempts, of course, at erasure of a whole people and removal of a whole native community from Palestine, not necessarily by killing all of them. Ethnic cleansing is part of it. Killing some of them to scare the rest away, etc., is part of it. All of these things there are a lot of elements into that. The reason I personally don't use genocide as a diagnosis is settler colonialism is a more comprehensive diagnosis. You know, cancer may or may not kill you, but cancer is the diagnosis if you have cancer. And you can list many symptoms of cancer. Let's say you have anemia, you have headache, you have you know, you have all sorts of things that could happen with cancer associated with it, including, you know, in this case, we can say settler colonialism has a lot of aspects to it. One aspect is attempted genocide.
Yeah.
And so I like settler colonialism as an overarching description because it's much clearer, in my opinion. And then you can talk within that on other areas, like what we talked about, symptoms like incarceration of native people, killing native people, whatever, destroying the environment for people. When you destroy the environment, by the way, that's also destroying their livelihood. When you kill 2 million buffaloes in North America, why did they do that? It's because they wanted to deprive the Native Americans of their livelihood. So when you deprive people of their livelihood, they die. When you bring them diseases like European diseases and spread it among them, they die. So these are all kind of expected and understood, if you want, not justified, of course, but understood effects of settler colonialism.
Thank you. There was a question which we could actually get to that later about getting the map of the disappeared villages. I mean, I think I know where to find that
I'm happy
myself.
to share the PowerPoint with anybody. They can email me. I'll put my email in the chat room. And I'm happy to send you any information or material you want on these issues.
Stephanie, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, can you please comment on the death in Israeli custody of that elderly Palestinian American, Omar Assad?
Yes, you know, he was about 80 years old, I believe, and you know, he is like me, a dual American and Palestinian, and so you know, when they hold you, Israel is very brutal. I mean, it's not. Again, you know, I don't want to belittle this in any way, but it is what's expected. I say when I'm arrested and I'm beaten, I understand that because that's the concept of colonialism and what they do. And of course, people die in custody. He's not the first one or the last one. Almost every week or two, there's cases of abuse and neglect, medical neglect. There's one person now who has cancer and he's in a coma. And he is in Israeli jail hospital, if you want. But they don't offer the right treatments and people die. And in this case, they, according to his brother, actually, whom I talked to, he was roughly handled and basically taken. And then the next I heard is he died in Israeli custody. We won't know the details for sure because Israel will not, of course, publish details of what exactly happened to him. And unlike all the other stories, thousands of them, it will never be that anybody will be punished for this treatment of an 80-year-old guy. So that's basically will happen. You know, I think if you want, and I do want to talk about actions you can do. You know, you can write letters to your congressmen, to your senators, and demand that Israel is held for the human rights violations, which are done, as pointed out by earlier, done with US taxpayer money. It's done by US support and shielding Israel from international law at the United Nations. Without the US, Israel would not last 2 weeks here without US support. You know, as an oppressive regime, it would not last. The only reason why it's the last colonial system that practices apartheid and gets away with it is because it has the full backing of Western governments, not just the US, but other Western governments. But I would say primarily the US. We give Israel as taxpayers, you and I still pay taxes, by the way. We give Israel more than what we give to Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America combined, which is like a third of the world population or 40% of the world population. And Israel is a small country of only 6 million Jews. You know, you could fit in a tiny town in China, you know. Why do we do that? Why do we also shield it from international law? Why does the US used its veto power at the United Nations to protect Israel, actually used it more than it used it to protect itself. You know, the 5 major powers have veto power at the UN. The US used its veto power to protect Israel more times than it used it to protect itself. Of course, it used it to protect itself. For example, when the US was engaged in war crimes and crimes against humanity in Vietnam, and all the world was against that, the US used the veto power to shield itself. But it shields Israel from the same UN resolutions and international law that relates to humanitarian issues. So I think we have a responsibility as US citizens, we all have responsibilities to work towards changing this. It is not good for the US, it's not good for Palestinians, it's not even good for Israelis, by the way, to maintain this sick relationship, I would call it, between the US and Israel. It's sick, the way the US funds and supports. Basically, again, as Paul said, one could describe it as genocide. In Gaza, it is genocide. When you have 2.3 million people cooped up in a prison, open air prison, semi-arid conditions, and you don't allow even basic medicines and foods to enter, and you don't allow means of production, you're causing genocide.
I think we froze for a moment. We're getting towards, maybe it was just my internet, but anyway, we're getting towards the end of the meeting because it's like 3 a.m., 3 o'clock in the morning in Palestine. But I think we could maybe get this one question in, and then the others we could possibly answer on email if that's possible. Mark Weber asked, could Mazin comment on the process by which settler colonial forces create a narrative that designates them as the real indigenous people?
Yes, I mean, the situation here, this is where it's a little bit different than, let's say, Dutch or British in South Africa. Dutch and British in South Africa, they use the same mentality that the Zionists used, which is promised land and and shiny city on a hill used in North America, etc., that God gave us this land. All of this, they use the religious metaphors and the religious, propaganda basically to justify going here. When this becomes less easy to sell, if you want, you have to come up with new ideas. And the Zionist idea is the following, is very simple. It says that Jews were here, they were native Palestinians, basically, they were natives in this country, the land of Canaan, and that they were expelled, went into the world, dispersed into the world, and then they were brought back by Zionism to their ancestral land. This is the propaganda they use. And this is supposedly going to give them indigeneity or give them native rights, if you want. Well, the historical evidence actually is very clear on this. European Jews, for example, are genetically, and I'm a medical geneticist, European Jews are mostly Europeans genetically. Yemeni Jews are mostly Yemeni genetically, all genetically Yemeni. Ethiopian Jews are Ethiopians. Judaism, like any other religion, had large-scale conversions to it, happened in many parts of the world, and this is evidenced by genetics, but it's also evidence, even if you're not a geneticist like me and can look at DNA sequences and all of this stuff, you can even see phenotypically that people like, I don't know, Netanyahu is European, whereas, there are Sephardic Jews that are more like Arabs, Mediterranean. There are Palestinian Jews, by the way. These are native people like me, okay? My family is Palestinian Christian. We are native. There are also Palestinian Jews, native. There are Samaritans, by the way, who are native also. They were born and raised here, acquired different religions. When religions came here, people acquired different religions. So it is illogical to say that all Jews of the world are somehow, dispersed native people who have a right to come back. But even if one, crazy as the idea may sound, even if one says, okay, fine, all Jews have traced ancestry here. Well, there are traced ancestries everywhere. What does that mean? The Arabs, for example, colonized Spain for a long time. So many Arabs can trace their ancestry to Spaniards or people who lived in Spain. Does that mean we have a right to go back to Spain and take it over? Or whatever. I mean, it doesn't make sense, to use that logic. And this third point to make about that, there is the native Palestinians. What to do with those? Do they have a right or do they not have a right? Even if I say, okay, Jews from Europe have a right here to come and live in this country. And I say they're welcome, actually, I don't mind. If they want to come and live here in peace, fine by me. But do they have a right to expel me as a native indigenous person? This is the conundrum that they face. Even if you accept their logic, it still would not sell, because that means that they have a right to expel the native people who happen to convert to other religions. My family is Christian, but who knows, before in the 3rd century AD, when we can show that we go back to the 3rd century AD, my family, who knows, before that, they may have been Jewish or may have been pagan or may have been another religion. Does that mean we lose our rights simply because we converted to another religion or converted to Islam? Some Palestinians, when Islam came here in the 6th century, they converted to Islam. Do they lose their right? Well, if they don't lose their right, if you accept that they have the rights to remain here, even with all the Jewish immigration from abroad, you can never have a Jewish state. The vast majority of the people here are not Jewish. So if you cannot have a Jewish state, then what's this whole thing is about? you know. You cannot have it because logically it cannot happen in a country that's occupied by other people, that has other people living in it. This is a conundrum that we face here. It's all, I mean, the propaganda is one thing, but the facts and the reality on the ground is another. I'm happy to extend, by the way, if you want. I'm already up and.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was my next question.
If you
Because we have a
more
few more.
questions.
Thank you so much. I saw one in there that I'm just remembering. Is there any hope for leadership change in occupied Palestine?
For what?
Leadership change, change of leadership.
Leadership change, now you will get me in trouble. I'm already in trouble. There are 4 governments that don't like me. The Israeli government, of course, the American government, the FBI and others. There's the Jordanians, there's the Palestinian government also that doesn't like me. Good. I post on Facebook things. But anyways, yes, there is a high potential for leadership change. But leadership ultimately comes from the people, and tyrants remain in power only by the consent of the people that don't revolt. And I mentioned earlier the apathetic people. If you have 98% of the people apathetic and 1% opposed and 1% supportive, then situation will not change. If the number of activists increase from 1 to 2% in any country, even in the US, by the way, then you can change authority, change leadership, etc. We didn't get civil rights in the US because the vast majority of people pushed the government, or because the government the people in government at the time suddenly had inspiration to give civil rights, or give 40-hour work week, or give a woman right to vote in the 1920s and so on. No, we got that when we had a small minority of people, usually 1 or 2% going out and knocking on doors and protesting and going out in demonstrations. Those 1 or 2%, if they increase to 3 or 4%, as happened in the civil rights movement, then they pressured the government and they got the politicians kicking and screaming to do the right thing, basically. So that's how change happens. And I think the same applies in Palestine and among the Israelis and so forth. The Israeli public is mostly apathetic, it doesn't care. There are right-wing Israelis, 1 or 2%. There are 1 or 2% Israelis who are for human rights. And the key for us is in any situation like this, and the same for Palestinians, 1 or 2% that are active. If we can double that to 4%, then we can change our own authority, and the Israelis can change their authorities.
Very good. Thank you. I see there's actually 3 or 4 questions, but we'll start with the one that we got from David Berenson. This may sound obvious, he says, but after research, diagnosis, then prognosis, next comes treatment and cure. Fighting against the ultimate power is something many already do. Educating people and re-educating people, we have been taught from one-sided propaganda is a part. I don't know if that makes sense. David, you want to rephrase it, or you're good? You got that, Mazin?
I'm not sure I understood. Can you?
Yeah. David, do you want to unmute?
It wasn't really a question, more of a comment, but it was educating people and re-educating people who have been taught from one-sided propaganda is a part. I'm just saying that from my own point of view, because growing up Jewish in the United States, I grew up with a lot of propaganda, which is, what Mazin was describing. And so, some of us have re-educated ourselves, but there's a lot of people who still learn that propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, if I may comment on this issue, most people, unfortunately, are raised in a milieu that guides them in a particular direction. And so very few people that do critical thinking and reading in a way that that separates them from the chains that hold their brains back. And I was very lucky when I was a teenager that my grandfather was around, always telling me, shed all these social and historical mythologies that exist. And it exists on, you know, for all people, for most people. You have to challenge your own mind, and very few people do it. That's why I always say it's always a minority, never a majority of people that shed those chains and challenge the systems that they live in. So our role is to think of ways to crack those chains and help, and that starts with ourselves. I mean, I started with myself when I was a young man, and then, you know, in my 20s and teens, late teens, that I had to challenge some mythologies that I was raised with, and including issues related to religion or gender roles or other things. And I think people have to do that. They start with themselves, and then the more challenging question, how to affect others. And this is why we started an institute that focuses on children. And I'm not interested in educating children or brainwashing children or anything. Children are born with that intuitive, critical thinking, inquisitions, you know, why is the sky blue kind of questions. And I think these are things that we just create an environment where they develop these critical thinking aspects among the Palestinians. I mean, we can also talk about the Palestinians themselves. I mean, David, you were raised in a certain milieu. There are Palestinians raised in a certain milieu. There are Palestinians who are raised with dogma, with paternalism, with I don't know, tribalism, with the notions of us versus them, with notions that are harmful, and they are raised not because they're born like that. As I said, children are not born like that. It's the way that they are indoctrinated, and we need to deprogram them. But that starts with them deprogramming themselves, and we have an environment here that helps them if they choose to. If they don't, that's up to them, of course.
Thank you. Colin Jones, are you still in the house? You could voice your question. You had your hand up.
Yep, I'm here.
Please go ahead.
Mazin, thank you for coming to speak to us today. I'm very delighted to see you live. Quick question. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us what are your most important objectives, or one or two really top level things you'd like to accomplish in 2022, and what can we in the USA do to help out? And I ask the question partly because we're a bit of a closed society sometimes here with our various groups. We're preaching to ourselves, the choir, and we're not necessarily doing as much as we should do or should try to do to get the message outside to a broader public. And I can say that out of any group of 200 people I know, I'm lucky if I find one or two of them who have any knowledge of what the heck is going on in Palestine and Israel. And what they do know has been informed by, you know, novels like Exodus. So I'm looking for ways I can do something useful. And if there's a particular objective you have for this year, that some kind of outside support, short of actually coming there now, which is not really on the table, obviously, you know, what can we do to help?
Thank you. Thanks for these questions. Very, very important what you said. First, what is our long-term plan goals and what is our short-term goals? These, by the way, have to be, at least the short-term goals, have to be modifiable, adaptable, changing as the circumstances dictate. But long-term goals, I think you all would agree with me, is what we want here is sustainable human and natural communities. Sustainable human and natural communities, meaning diversity of people, that's number for the people, and diversity of nature. That's our long-term goal for Palestine and for the global earth, in my humble opinion. Our short-term goals, of course, to get to that long-term goal include things like education, research, conservation. We have like 10 specific objectives for our 5-year plan that we put together for the Institute here, but we revisit it every year and make adjustments to it. If I was to prioritize them personally, myself, because the change to get to sustainable nature and sustainable human communities require people, changing people is the most important thing. Working with people is the most important thing. Working with children is the most important thing. So I go back to this thing of creating an environment for people to grow in a healthy way of thinking, a healthy way of acting towards other people, not hating the other because he's a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or whatever, and not destroying nature, not using plastics and throwing things around, things like that. So that's mentality, you know, mental liberation, I would say. I wrote a chapter on this. If you're interested, I could send you a chapter on liberating our minds from mental colonization, basically. And that's the most important thing. Now, how do we do this? I found again that lecturing is not a good strategy. What's the best way is to create an environment and bring people, attract them to that environment, just like you create an environment for a plant to grow in a pot, for example, with soil, water, sunlight, all of this. The plant grows on its own. The same for human minds. You create an environment in which these things happen naturally. If the environment is not healthy, the plant is not going to grow, no matter how intrinsically capable of growth it is. So creating the environment for me is the most urgent priority, not just this year, but every year, is to continue to build an environment where people continue to liberate their minds from mental colonization, grow their own foods. We have a community garden here. Children have a playground, exploration playground. I'll send you a video if you want and things like that. You can see what happens. I presume many of you are on my email list. If you're not on my email list, I put my email in the chat room. Send me an email and I'll add you to our email list so that you can get information. Now, to come to the second part, which is even more important, what can each person do? And I don't presume to tell people they should do what I'm doing, because they can do equally productive work in a totally different field that they are interested in. So I say there are 1,001 ways to do activism. On my website, qumsiyeh.org, there's 71 ways that I put, including like boycott, divestment, sanctions, like supporting humanitarian efforts, like environmentalism, like media work, all of the stuff that I put that relate to Palestine, of course. 71 actions. I should add more to them, but I'll put the link for that also in the chat room in a minute when I finish speaking. But you can choose. If you are interested in music, use music for resistance. If you're interested in media work, use media. If you're interested in politics, go knock on doors and work for progressive candidates or people that speak out. You know, Huwaida Arraf is running for Congress now, I heard. You can support her. You can use boycotts if you are inclined to economic pressures. There are many ways you can do it, but don't do one thing just because I tell you to do it or because somebody else tells you to do it. Do what you think is right, and you will do very well in it because you believe in it and you can change. The most important thing, as I said, is to get out from that category of apathy and lack of interest to category of activism. And if you're in the category of activism, no matter what you do, it's still good because at least you're doing something. I'll get this link.
Francis, would you close us out?
Yes, yes, I will do that, Don. Thank you very much, Mazin, for staying up late for us. We really appreciate what you're doing here, what you're doing where you are, and what you're doing for us in helping us understand what's going on there. The Peace Action Board over the last couple of months has embraced the idea of settler colonialism as something that really explains a lot of what has happened in U.S. history and in Palestine today and other places in the world. And frankly, for many of us, it's a relatively new concept. So that's why we're doing this series. The next installment on this series on recognizing settler colonialism is on February the 11th. It's not at 7 o'clock, but at 7:30. And it will be a book discussion featuring Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who has written so powerfully on the indigenous people's history of the United States, and has a new book out, which I should say is available at Max Bax and Loganberry Books if you want to read up before you hear her. And her new book is called Not a Nation of Immigrants. We often hear that we're supposed to be a nation of immigrants. Well, we're a nation of settlers predominantly. That's the white folks here are a nation of settlers or white folks who came along after the settlers cleared the field for other people to be here. It's a very powerful book, and I believe it's going to be a very illuminating discussion with a speaker who is every bit as remarkable as Mazin is, and writing on this subject. It really looks at the bigger concept of settler colonialism in a North American context, and the racism, the violence, the militarism, and the economic disparities and economic exploitation that are a fundamental feature of United States history and a fundamental feature of settler colonialism. With that, I want to leave you. If you want to link, by the way, to this event on February 11th, just look at our website, peaceactioncleveland.org, and it will be right there on the homepage, the link to the meeting. And if you do want to support our efforts, you can also find a donate button there at peaceactioncleveland.org. Thank you, Mazin, for being with us, and thank you all for coming. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Mazin.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for putting this together, the series, as well as this tonight's. Good to see many of you that I haven't seen in a while.
Yes, back at you.
Great. Good to see you, David.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, Nina. And Jeff.